Well, thanks everybody for coming to this forum about drug prices and their impact on consumers. This is the first of a two-part series on drug prices. Tomorrow we'll be in Sacramento. The audience there is government policymakers. But we had Lisa Gill from Consumer Reports coming in, and we wanted to have as many opportunities as possible for people to interact with her. So what you'll be having today is first you'll hear from Lisa about the impact of drug prices on consumers. And then I'll talk to you a little bit about clinical scenarios where drug prices are high and the variation among them, and also show a little bit of data about who pays when drug prices increase. But first, we'll start with Lisa Gill, who is Deputy Editor at Consumer Reports, and among the many hats she wears is the hat of drug price expert. So, Lisa,
awesome.
Thanks.
Thank you. I am so delighted that everybody made it this afternoon. Thank you so much. It is an honor to be here, and we are talking about a topic that is very near and dear to my heart and also to our program at Consumer Reports. So I'm very appreciative that you're here to talk about it. I want to make one really important distinction and before I really launch in, and that is that we look at drug prices a lot, but most of what I'm talking about today is drug costs. So out-of-pocket costs, what do people actually pull out of their wallet and pay when they fill a prescription? So that's really the driving force behind this presentation. So I just want to clear the air about that. One thing too I want to mention is that, so Consumer Reports is an 81-year-old organization, and it's really known for its testing of automobiles and microwave ovens and refrigerators, but we also look at healthcare costs, safety, and effectiveness. And I have focused specifically on pharmaceutical, both over-the-counter and prescription medications, and really looking at, well, does this stuff work? How does it compare to other things in its class or other types of drugs to treat a specific condition? We look at common medications for common conditions. We're trying to reach as many millions of people as possible. And then we also look at the cost or price of the drug, trying to understand, well, is this even affordable? Is it even worth that amount of money? So that's been really my primary focus at Consumer Reports for the last 10, almost, I kind of realized on the way over here, I'm working on my 10th year here, which is awesome because working at Consumer Reports is actually a dream come true for me. I grew up in Indiana in the 70s, and my parents my father's a retired now government worker and Vietnam veteran, and my mother is a retired school teacher, and we grew up with just no money, and the only time we would ever make a big purchase, they would consult Consumer Reports first. And so that's how I really came to understand what the organization does, and I would sit in the public library and read every rating of the Oldsmobile car that we might buy. And so that's how I really got my entrance into what they do, and I was just like, this is where I want to be because it's such a good place. So my program, Best Buy Drugs, has been around also about a decade. We're funded, so my first conflict of interest is that we are funded by a public education grant as a result of fraudulent marketing by what became Pfizer of a drug called Neurontin. It's an anti-convulsant, but this company did some pretty bad stuff, and so we wound up the benefit of a few $1 million to help educate the public about effectiveness and comparative effectiveness. So that's my only disclosure. A couple things too that I wanted before we really also dive in is look at the total, what is the context in which this discussion takes place. In 2015, through reporting, so my background is a reporter. I'm a journalist. I'm not in medicine, or I'm not a pharmacist, but we consult regularly with a team of people. And part of our journalistic reporting effort realized that $424 billion were spent every year, at least in 2015, on drugs sold at the pharmacy counter. Now, that number is higher than what you'll see reported in the press. It's usually $100 billion less, because they say, wow, that's after discounts. And they want you to not focus on, well, where did that $100 million go? But it's logged, and so we decided to focus on that number. That's an important distinction. And then part of our research is also doing every year or even twice a year, we do nationally representative telephone surveys, and we ask people of all ages, income levels, everything. Everything about the medication. How many do you take? How do you buy them? How much do they cost? Have you done anything to lower your costs? What did you experience at the counter? What do you experience at the doctor's office? And one thing we learned, and we've seen, which in 10 years hasn't adjusted too much, but half of all adult Americans take between 4 and 5 medications. And even that's true at the 18 to 35-year-old range. It's amazing. Most of the time when I have this discussion, people say, well, that's just older people, but that's not true. The 18 to 35-year-olds take about 3.5, but we take a lot of drugs. Last year, over 4 billion prescriptions were filled at pharmacies, which is just like shocking. So we started also looking at, well, what's happening when people go fill a prescription? And we were shocked to find out just in the last 12 months, in a survey we did a few months ago, that 1 out of every 4 people said that for a drug that they regularly take, so these are everyday, like generic drugs for things like high blood pressure and high cholesterol, depression, pain, they'd experienced at least one of their drugs spiking at the cost. So if they were spending $10, it jumped maybe $40 or $50 higher than what they expected. And that's important because these are medications that they're accustomed to paying all the time, and they're taking every day, and they're taking maybe for the rest of their lives. And to have even just one drug jump that high in price has pretty serious consequences. So and this is, Jerry Pancake is like a perfect example, and that actually is his last name. Jerry Pancake is 61 years old, and he lives in this great state of California. He has high cholesterol. He had been prescribed pravastatin by his doctor. He'd been taking it forever and ever, and he used his insurance, and he paid $6 every month. Now, pravastatin has been on the market for like over 30 years, and you could get it, even without insurance, at every major retail pharmacy on one of their generic discount drug lists for like $4, $5, $10 for 3 months. But he used his insurance, no big deal. But a few months ago, or like earlier this year, when he went to go fill the prescription, the pharmacist told him that will be $49. He was completely taken aback, and he did not fill the prescription. He went home and picked up the phone, called his insurance company, and his insurance company said, well, we don't know why that's the case. He just wanted to know, well, why? I can pay it, but I want to know why. They wouldn't give him an answer. Then he called the pharmacy benefit manager, asked the same question. Why did this drug go from $6 to $49? We don't know why. They wouldn't tell him. So he wound up not using his insurance, taking some of the tips that I'll talk about later, and getting a better deal. Once we hung up the phone and stopped our proper interview with him, we found it for him for $16, which is outrageous. But this scenario turns out to be extremely common, and this is what we were getting at through our surveys. We found that Jerry Pancake was one of probably, we estimate, about 4 million people in the last 12 months who have left a prescription at the pharmacy counter because they cannot afford it. So people did other things. They sometimes shopped around, asked a pharmacist for a lower priced drug, or they called their doctor. But in 14% of cases, which is just at like 3.9 million people, did not fill the prescription. And that is for a drug, I will remind you, that they have to take all the time. So the consequence of high, just even small price increases out of pocket have very substantial and sometimes debilitating effects on people's finances and on their health. And that is where we enter this story. So I don't know what prompted me. This is my niece and nephew at Halloween last night. And I looked at the picture and I was like, I don't know what they're doing and why that's happening. And I was like, that's perfect for this slide. So why is this happening? And I'm gonna just hotline these really quickly so we can get to the actual advice. But the 3 things that we've identified are that more and more people in the commercial market are on high deductible insurance plans. Kaiser Family Foundation does an annual survey, and they have determined that about 4 out of every 10 people who get their insurance through their job have some type of high deductible plan. Now, technically, that means that they spend, for an individual, they have to spend a little over $2,000 out of pocket before their insurance kicks in. For a family, technically, it's about $4,200 also, or $4,200. But we have interviewed dozens and dozens of families where the deductible was like $12,000, 15,000, and so they had catastrophic coverage. They were hopefully never going to reach that in a year's time because their incomes were fairly low, and so they never got the benefit of like a lower discount drug price. They just never could use insurance. It's heartbreaking. So high deductible insurance plans are one of the problems. Second problem is that even for people who don't have a high deductible plan, and you may have experienced this in your own insurance, a drug may be moved around on a formulary technically you're supposed to have knowledge of it, but often a consumer doesn't understand if you move a drug from tier 1 to tier 3 or tier 4. It may not have much meaning. Tier 1 is generally, in insurance parlance, it's the low-cost generic tier, so it's averaged about maybe $5, $10. But when you start moving up to tier 2, tier 3, tier 4, the price increases and it can go up pretty high. So if you get a letter in the mail, most people have told us that they have they don't know that this is going to happen when they fill the prescription. Insurance companies will tell you, well, we sent them a letter, but I don't know I never read my mail, so I don't think most people do either. But even if they do read it, they don't understand it. So that's the second problem. And not only that, and we've been, this formulary issue, what we call mid-year formulary changes. So you wouldn't be too surprised to hear that a pharmacy benefit manager every 12 months will drop some drugs, right? And then they'll cover up new drugs. But what they do throughout the year is they're also dropping and adding medications. And so you've signed up, you think, all my medications, this happens even in Medicare Part D. Everything's covered, and you get halfway through the year and all of a sudden the drug is not covered. It happens with insulin, it happens with life-saving medications. So that's a second problem. Third problem is the simple issue of just there are a few very, very high-priced medications, and the insurance industry tells us, well, that drives up costs for everybody. And it's not that they're wrong, it's just that the three things together have sort of conspired for American, basically it feels like a battle against Americans' pocketbooks. And I would say, even though 3 gets the most attention, the first 2 are harder to pinpoint, but the 3 things together make it really difficult. Okay. Now we're going to talk about the tips. So, and that little picture is me with 2 puppets, because we got to work with puppets, which I'm going to show you the video, hopefully, in a little bit, that we did for a promotional TV commercial to get people to check their medications at their pharmacy. Okay, so the tips that we have told consumers, we say it repeatedly. I go on TV, I talk to people, or I talk to groups, or we write it in our magazine, we write it on the website. First one is actually you can save money by taking fewer medications. Now that seems obvious, but what we were stunned to find out is that in a recent survey just in May of this year, we learned that 1/3 of people who regularly take a prescription drug have never had a nurse, a pharmacist, or a doctor sit down and look at all their medications at once. Now think about that. That is 1/3 of over 100 million people. That is an incredible problem. And you can see it because it creates, I would say, harm on the back end. We also learned, though, that when somebody did go to the doctor and they said, can I stop taking any of my medications, please? Over 70% of the time, the doctor agreed and took them off at least one medication. So that prompted us to think about, well, that is an incredible stat. It means that conversation is not happening, and that it should happen because obviously, not just to save money, but also to help with your safety and just to stop taking meds that you don't need. So this has been a new one that we've really, really tried to hone in on because I couldn't get over the stats. Okay, the second one. I don't know how many physicians are in the room, but this cost conversation can be very difficult for a patient. And we've seen that on the consumer side, but we did an online poll not long ago, actually last year, of 200 internal medicine physicians and said, we were trying to understand, well, how often do you talk about costs? How often, where do you think about it when you're prescribing a medication? And it not only does it rank at the bottom consistently, which is a problem, the other thing we learned was that they are reluctant to bring up that cost conversation. And they have some good reasons. It's not that it's the worst thing. And then it's true, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, many medications were affordable, or there was some sense of coverage, and it was a different era. But today, that conversation is essential. So we have been pushing consumers to ask their doctor, how much is this going to cost? And if it's too expensive, what are the alternatives? Now, most physicians will tell you, and any of you might want to talk about, you won't know, right? And the second, so my response always is, well, if it's something that you suspect is expensive, we tell consumers to ask at the point of care, at the point in the doctor's office, can you please call the insurance company and find out? So that that conversation about alternatives can happen in the office, which is, I know, kind of intense, but there's no other, the alternative is they're standing at a pharmacy counter, potentially, trying to figure out how much is this, I can't pay for it, and they'll abandon the prescription. So you run into like the compliance issues, I think.
Have you considered asking them, have you asked them if they are ready to abandon it? Do consumers ever ask their pharmacist to call the physician? Because it probably
Yes.
is easier to call than
So, right, so we asked the people who, when the drug price went up, we asked them, well, what did you do? So sometimes they ask the pharmacist to call the physician. Sometimes they call a physician themselves. Sometimes they ask the pharmacist for a better deal or a different drug. And then it's that 14% that just like, they just abandon it. And I think part of it, it's easier when you all are interested in this topic. So you are sort of consumer advocates in some ways. And it's easier it rolls off the tongue. But when you're standing, I think, at the pharmacy, we've gone and just like watched people as part of our like research. And you can see people they're flustered. I mean, they can't deal with it. There's like a line of people behind them. They got kids at their feet, and it's just like they can't afford it. And so they just abandon that. So that conversation, we have to push it up the line. I hope someday that better tools will be available, apps that you can like plug in and like look at what the coverage would be for somebody specifically. But until then, we're in an awkward place. Yeah. Yes, so that's the other part. So once they...
Lisa, could you repeat it? I'm not sure people on the video will be able to hear the comments from the audience.
Excellent comment, not just what is the cost that a patient should ask, but also what is the alternative. So that question, I think, is important once you have to know what that cost is, or not just the cost, but is it affordable to me? And if I can't afford that, then the next question is, what's the alternative? So that's part of what we're hopeful. This is to me like a work in progress. So I will happily take all of your comments and as we sort of think through what to tell consumers. But I do think the cost conversation has to happen. And I will say what's wonderful is that those 200 physicians, cost was an important topic to them. So it's not that they don't want to have the conversation, it's just that they don't, and mostly because they don't know the amount. So that's, number 2 is difficult, I acknowledge that. Okay, number 3. We have suggested this for a long time because so many retail pharmacies offer hundreds of generic drugs at substantial discounts if you don't use your insurance. It's not for every generic and it's not for every strength. So it doesn't always line up with what a consumer is taking. But these programs are fantastic. And one thing I like about them is that the price is transparent. You can very clearly see how much something is and you can compare it across other retail pharmacies. We've learned that people did not take advantage of these, and over the course of the last 4 or 5 years, people have often too, when this price is lower than their insurance copay, they'll do this. Oh, and one other thing. You usually have to ask the pharmacist if your drug applies. If they see your insurance, they're obliged, either contractually or otherwise, and they will just run your insurance through. But consumers typically have to ask, is there any other way that I can pay for this?
Just to highlight that one, since we're trying to make sure consumers get it, there appear to be gag clauses in contracts that pharmacists have with manufacturers or pharmacy benefit managers that make it so they're not allowed to tell you if there is a lower priced option or an option where you could purchase the same thing that you've just asked them for at a lower cost. They're not allowed to tell you unless you specifically ask.
So Consumer Reports was actually the first news organization to uncover that fact, and I'm very proud of that. And
why we need a free independent media.
So, and I'll tell you where it came from. So thank you. So we called we did a secret shopper study where we called 200 pharmacies in 6 metro areas, including the suburban and rural areas, pricing out a market basket of 5 drugs on the retail price. And we found all sorts of things, and I'm going to talk about one of them in my next slide. But one of the things we're rating is, well, which chain charges more and which charges less. So we got to call Costco. We always have to call before we publish something and to let them know what the results are. We called Costco and we said, hey, congratulations, your market basket of drugs it's not just like lower, but it's like 10 times lower than what the highest one is. And we asked, can you tell us a little bit about why that is? And also we said, why is it that we had to call sometimes 2 times and ask a second time, well, what is the lowest possible price you can give me? And they told us about gag clauses. And what they said is, well, under certain plans, our pharmacists cannot offer the lowest price. They cannot offer a lower price if it's a retail price, actually any price. They are obliged by contract to just give you what they see in the computer. Unless a consumer asks, what are the other prices? What is the retail price? And when the consumer asks, it sort of unlocks this gag clause, and sort of the contract is no longer in place. And the other thing we learned after that is that this was true also at independent pharmacies, at like thousands of independent pharmacies around the country, and that many pharmacists had experienced this. So we tell consumers, listen, always ask, what's the lowest possible price? What is the best deal you can give me, even if I don't use my insurance? I would say that the commercial plans do not understand that that's what's in the contracts between the pharmacy benefit managers and the retailers. In fact, I know that that's the case. Those phrases are not easily identifiable. So that's one thing that we have found. The main thing for us is that when our secret shoppers went out and started making phone calls, every time they asked for well, not every time, but most of the time they asked for a lower price, they got it. So that we know that there's power in that phrase. It may not be true for every single drug, and that is completely the case. And I will say it is mostly for generics are where we were measuring this issue, because for whatever reason, or for a lot of interesting reasons, the variation even within the same zip code was so great that we tried to understand, well, what happens if a consumer calls and says, tell me what the price is at CVS, and CVS says, well, it's $140. And you call Costco and they say, oh, it's 14. So that's to me, it's a fantastic consumer find. It's indicative of a terrible problem, but it's a good hack, for them to have called it. So this is my 5th. I'm going to come back to 4. Yes. So you have to use the insurance, right?
So I just want to make sure everyone can hear. So the comment from the audience was that it is posited, although I haven't actually seen the contracts, but it is posited that there are contracts where the gag rules are not lifted if the consumer, even if the consumer asks for a lower price. And Marilyn, you were going to say?
Yeah, and that's very true for government insurances with particular generic drug programs. So as an example, Walgreens, their generic drug program cannot be used in government programs with Medicare, Medicaid, or TRICARE.
And they're not alone. Actually, all retailers.
That's not true. That isn't true. Walmart, Target, which is now CVS, Costco, are all allowed to offer their generic drug programs to Medicare and Medicaid. It's only all the programs we've studied. Walgreens was the only one.
Yes. So for us, what was interesting is that the distinction between those 2 buckets of programs, they're different programs. One of them you have to sign up for, sometimes pay a fee.
Correct.
And so that program cannot bring in somebody on a government insurance.
Right.
Whereas a $4, $10 at Walmart, there's no signing up, there's no program to join. They're still good programs. I will say, the advice to a consumer to consider a program if their drug, for whatever reason, like Jerry Pancake, is suddenly not covered, it's not a bad option. Yeah. Okay, 3rd one. So as part of this shopping around, as part of this gag clause issue, GoodRx.com and BlinkHealth.com sometimes are offered the lowest and best route. Again, it's a hack. It doesn't solve the systemic issue of strange pricing, irrational formularies, or high prices, but it does offer a consumer in dire straits or desperate need another alternative to an otherwise high price. So if there's no Costco in your area, you would suffer.
The question was, does it help when you call to actually say, I don't have insurance? So you were saying, Lisa?
Yes, it helps when you call to say, I am not using any insurance, or I don't have insurance. And that way it allows, they're not in this PBM contract mode, and they can, from what we can tell with secret shoppers, they're able to have a more substantial conversation. And even sometimes negotiate. So we have that.
But it's a paradox of our system that we've gotten to the point where if you're insured, you have to deny it. That if you shop around, you lose the continuity. If you have just one pharmacy, they know what drugs you're on, they see what drug interactions possibly could happen.
The safety, you are 100% correct. The safety consequence of this is not good. And so as we have written in most of our editorial and as we talk about this, we do remind people, if you find a really great deal at one pharmacy for your one specific drug, move everything to that pharmacy. But using a single pharmacy is the ideal, and that is, cherry picking is a super bad idea.
And now I'm going to hand the microphone to Marilyn Stebbins, professor of pharmacy, professor in the School of Pharmacy here at UCSF, to explain how that happens.
So I can tell you that my area of expertise is Medicare. And being a retiree, and if you have retiree coverage and you don't like the drug coverage within your retiree coverage, and you think about going and getting a Medicare Part D plan that may cover that one drug, it absolutely will kick you out of your employer coverage. So you're 100% right about what they were telling you. So if you choose to purchase another insurance through Medicare, you forfeit your rights not just to your drug benefit for your retiree benefit, but your entire medical benefit as well. So that is a loophole. I think what we're talking about here is if you had a very expensive drug with your retiree coverage, is there a way that you can go outside of your insurance, not purchasing another insurance, but are there discount programs that you might be eligible for that could get you that particular drug at a lower cost? But you are correct. What they told you is you will get kicked out of that, and I've seen it happen where people think they're shopping around and doing the right thing, and they lose their entire retirement benefit, and they can't get back in. So that's what I do all fall. I go around doing Medicare. When you did the survey of individuals who their drug prices were jumping in a 12-month period, what was the age group of those folks? Was it all comers? Because it's very common for a Medicare patient who's got a Medicare plan to hit the donut hole or the coverage gap where they lose coverage. So we get that all the time, and from April to the rest of the year where they say...
You know what, actually it was the opposite. If you're insured by a Part D plan, you have more stable coverage.
That's what you found in your survey? That is interesting. It must be the time of year that you asked.
So we ask usually this is fielded in August, and this particular most recent one was fielded in March.
Yeah, because National Donut Hole Day is September 21st.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean,
I was familiar with National Donut Day, but... Another question? Go ahead.
Yes. So if she went and paid retail, let's say from an online...
If you pay by yourself, you're fine. No, if you pay by yourself, you're fine. If you purchase another insurance, that's what says, oh, I've got an alternative insurance. I no longer need my employer-provided retirement insurance, and then you're out of the program. But if you go and purchase it on your own, they wouldn't even know, right? You can go and pay cash.
Right,
so.
right. So, this does, you made the joke about, denying insurance winds up maybe being your best bet. One of the things my colleagues and I are asking is insurance a good deal, just in general? It is obviously for health insurance, but why is it that for certain types of individuals, not using insurance consistently may be cheaper? And that's
Oh, so a comment here is, I've been buying my medication from India, and that's less expensive.
Even though I had Kaiser, it's cheaper for me than buying at Costco or at Kaiser if I buy it, if I bring it when I go or I have it shipped. So I don't get it.
So that's, so one of the policy, isn't one of your policy recommendations tomorrow going to be to allow reimportation of drugs?
Yes, there's caveats. So it's
Right.
under a certain condition. Right now, the FDA cannot guarantee the safety, potency, or hang on, I'm not saying that what you're doing is wrong or bad.
I'll address your point after you do.
Well,
Okay.
just that for the whole of America, for all drugs coming in out from the outside, the FDA says we are not responsible. We will not be responsible if something goes awry for you. And not only will we not be responsible, we can't track and trace it, and we don't have any information about it.
I'll address your point. The FDA actually investigates and controls the top 12 pharmacy companies in India, or 15.
I understand that.
So-
I understand that. I'm saying that we won't support reimportation until
We, the FDA, not we, Consumer
Consumer
Reports.
Reports can't
Oh.
support it until the FDA says that the FDA will take responsibility, not just for the companies that are manufacturing generics, but for other drugs that are reimported by even individuals or small companies or any company. So you brought up a very important point, and that is they are inconsistent in what they do and say. And that's
Actually, 2 parts. Because 45% of all official generics sold in the US is from India.
I understand. I know this is part of the issue. This is why we want the FDA to take responsibility for all medications that get re-imported. They should, because of what you've just described. But they don't right now. That's part of the problem. And I without going like to a place that's just not that, but they should. And so part of what Consumers Union, which is our policy arm, is supporting is that that the FDA will take responsibility. They'll work with distributors all around the world, not just generic companies, but wholesalers and pharmacies, individual pharmacies, so they can properly track and trace. And that to me is probably the most important thing. I don't know if it'll actually ever happen, but it is enough usually to scare pharmaceutical companies.
Another issue we found with reimportation was that if you're going to India and getting them yourself and bringing them back, that's one issue. But I had a lot of people when I was running a clinic for people who couldn't afford their meds, who were doing reimportation through Canada, and very often that drug got stopped at the border in customs and they never got it. So they paid for it and it never got to them, and there's no recourse because they're not doing it legally. So.
But yeah, people know that I get mine, and then they say, "Can you get this?" And I say, "I can't bring it for you.
Right.
I'm not allowed to." But
Right.
you call this guy and they ship it.
We would call that a hack.
Yeah.
And I can perfectly understand it. We have to work on the system so that the system can do that, because that's an excellent point, and that would solve a lot of our problems.
And more from our School of Pharmacy. Hi.
I could only say that there have been multiple medications coming from other countries of which have been catastrophic
Yes.
results.
Yes.
So just to globally say that we could introduce the FDA to having the same strict regulations, enforcement, internationally is asking more than we can have a budget better for FDA. I'm just asking for our current administration to put more money into that. It is a huge ask, especially with international internet sales, et cetera. The FDA allows us for the whole safety and regulatory pieces to avoid those deaths that have happened because of this exactly.
I completely agree, and this has been, from an organizational standpoint at Consumer Reports, probably the top issue. And I would say a couple of things to kind of add on to that. Not only do they get stopped at the border, and not only are they adulterated or counterfeit medications, if one of my slides were to tell you, well, go online and try to find a legitimate source, 98% of what you find online is completely illegitimate. So to your earlier point, going to a country and re-importing them yourself is a totally different matter than somebody sitting down my mother sitting down at the computer and typing in discount Canadian drugs. That whatever she's going to get up in the Googles is not going to be it's almost certain it won't be a legitimate pharmacy. So that problem alone, the acquisition part, I think is the first problem. The second, even in Canada, this is an amazing thing. In Canada, even if you order from a brick and mortar pharmacy that you know exists, that you know has good medications, once they ship something to the United States, neither the Canadian FDA equivalent nor our US FDA takes any responsibility for it.
Absolutely.
And so that for us presents like this strange, dangerous gray zone. And that is the part that I think that from an advocacy standpoint would have to be fixed, which is, to your point, it would take tremendous FDA resources to do that. But it may not be as bad as we think. And if we only limited it to, let's say, Canada just to begin with, it may not be so terrible, or New Zealand or Australia, I don't know, or France. There may be a way. I don't know if we'll ever actually get there, but that conversation, when it rises to a certain level and increases in its pitch, is enough sometimes to get drug companies to change. And that's really what we're asking for.
That conversation highlights that the market actually is a global market, but a strange global market in that most of the profit is available in the United States, and the prices are much higher in the United States. So that's why it's our FDA with the problem. And if we want to actually deal with this, we need to get some international cooperation about drug safety and drug pricing at the same time.
And then one final thing, so I'm switching around on the slides, but this is worth bringing up this is my last item of note. We interviewed dozens and dozens of consumers, and we had a consumer email us and say, can you help me find a lower cost Trexamet? And we were like, well, why would you need a lower cost Trexamet? Because Trexamet is two older medications put together. So today, just prior to coming over here, I just took a look. I use healthwarehouse.com because it's a US-based online pharmacy, and they have typically like the rock bottom prices. And healthwarehouse.com put Trexamet at $834 for 9 tablets, but I could get roughly the same thing for $32. So we remind people, if you're on what is like a crazy expensive medication, just double check that it's not a combination of older drugs, or that it's not a reformulation like an extended release or something that may be triggering the higher price.
We are looking at our claims data for these exact issues, and we look at it, and it not only costs the consumer, but it costs us as well through our insurance when we have crazy contracts. So we have an initiative right now to actually look at those issues, pull them out, let the providers know you can do this, right. and it'll definitely save our patients, and it'll save us as well.
So what's tricky about a drug like Trexamet is that a pharmacy benefit manager, like an Express Scripts or CVS Caremark, sees a nice rebate off of that. So it's a branded drug, and then an organization might see a rebate check at the end of the year because so many people took Trexamet. So the money, and I think you'll get into this in your talk, the middlemen who basically skim off the top all the way down the drug supply chain is reflected in that $834 price tag, and which is completely unnecessary. And that's why we remind consumers to double check. So I will leave that up for a second. So I'm Lisa Gill. I would love to email with any of you or talk to you on the phone if you have suggestions, comments, more information. You can see this is a work in progress. There's nothing perfect. We use nationally representative telephone survey data. We use secret shoppers. We do a lot of spot checking in our area. We rely on some of your research. We rely on individual consumers emailing us with questions. So I take in all data points as we're thinking about this issue.
And just to highlight, in case it's not very visible on the screen, her email address, her name is Lisa Gill. Her email is lgill, L-G-I-L-L, @consumer.org. And they really do take individual people with their individual special cases because they're trying to figure out how all of this works. One more question from the audience? Or comment?
Just in thinking from a consumer report standpoint, do you have like an online pharmacist chat so that somebody could type in a question and that pharmacist who is not restricted to any gag rules could easily tell you there's these alternatives, please discuss this with your provider. But then there is a way, in a straightforward way, to be able to communicate that information so it's not bias or these are just alternatives.
So that's taking journalism to the next level, isn't it?
So I would like to invite you to one of our staff meetings, because that has definitely been a topic of great interest. One thing, of course, is the liability issue, that when you're doing one-on-one types of what looks like a consultation, that we've probably sort of gently shied away from. But as we think about the amount of individual email that we get is pretty overwhelming, and it was hard to answer. Some of them are really complex cases, particularly in the pricing when you get into like individual insurance coverage and different sort of complex conditions that they might have. It's not always as simple as a Trexamet scenario. But we use the simple examples just to illustrate the complete irrationality of this system. But that's a good tip.
There are a lot of tools out there that are supposed to help consumers shop, but they seem to vary all over the map. Are you looking at the different tools and how they could be better?
So which other tools in particular that you're thinking about?
Well, so all the insurance plans seem to have their own tools, and then there are other tools like Pharmacy Checker and that come from different companies online, and it seems like they all give you different information. And it's hard for the consumer to figure out even which tool to use.
Sure. So Pharmacy Checker is a different type of service. It's looking at pharmacies outside the U.S. Since that's not part of our advice, we don't talk about Pharmacy Checker. Individual insurance tools we've not looked at directly on drugs because it's difficult to gain access to them. So though GoodRx and Blink Health are two that are easily accessible by anybody. They have apps and their websites. We've talked to the sort of corporate structures of them and tried to understand deeply how they work, and if there's something that could be beneficial to the public without losing their privacy or their information being sold. That's sort of one on the back end that we worry a lot about. Both those services are pretty good, and I would say anything that lends transparency to this process is essential, and both of those have been so far the best.
Let's, thank you, Lisa. So I want to put a little clinical context on it and then go back to prices a little bit. I'm going to review some clinical scenarios in which drug prices are high, and the key point here is that there are some where we actually might want, as strange as that sounds, we might want drug prices to be high because we really want people to do the things that get paid a lot. And then there are others where we're really not getting much value when the drug prices are high. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about drug price changes. The spikes that Lisa was mentioning are on the consumer side, but there's a list price behind that always. And you frequently hear in discussions, like when the EpiPen discussion was happening, we kept getting reassured, don't worry about the price because no one pays the price. You know, there are all these discounts and don't worry about it. And yes, the price has gone up a lot, but no one pays that. And so we are going to show some data about whether or not people pay that, and if so, how much. So just to put a little bit of numbers into context at the big system level, in the United States, we pay roughly twice what people in the United Kingdom pay. And so you can have a developed country that has excellent health care that pays a lot less for its drugs than we do here in the United States. And that reflects a series of policy decisions that we've made in this country. This is an example of the phenomenon Lisa was mentioning of a lot. There are now many more middle players in the drug market, and those middle players end up getting a lot of what gets paid in. So this is just an example from a single prescription. This was run through an excellent graphic at USA Today that I can send you to. But here the patient paid in $25 as the copay, the employer paid $232. So you have a total of $257. So if you were on the outside, you might think, okay, well then the drug company gets $257, or the pharmacy gets some of that and the drug company gets some of that. The key here is that, in fact, 5 different players end up getting some of that $257. So the drug company, this is the part you knew for sure was happening, the drug company is getting some, and you're not surprised that the pharmacy is getting some. But there's also a pharmacy benefit manufacturer who, the theory of the pharmacy benefit manufacturer was that they were going to buy in bulk and negotiate lower prices. But we can see that the prices are high, and that part of that is going to the pharmacy benefit manager. In addition, there's a wholesaler, so this might sound like they actually have lots of stores of, have a big warehouse full of drugs, but no, they don't actually. There's someone else who has big warehouses full of drugs, and they take a cut too. And then these relationships have developed to the point where, so this is the employer usually is paying in this $232, but the insurer gets a rebate back from the manufacturer. So some of the money that comes in actually goes to the insurer. And that's important because if you think of drug costs as a big part of, or a significant part of what insurance overall costs, then you might expect the insurance companies to want to do something about that and to want to try and make those as low as possible. But it's at least possible that they don't. That in fact, every time you go out and buy a drug, they get something back. And if the rebates are really big, then they actually get a lot back. And they charge you for this amount. This amount gets rolled into your premium, but that amount goes to them. So they're not just making money off the premium that you pay them, but in fact, in some instances, when you buy a drug, like they don't want you, part of the reason for the gag clauses is the insurer may not want you to not use your insurance, because if you use insurance, they actually make money. As weird as that sounds, for there to be more medical services under an insurance contract that helps the insurer, that should be weird. That shouldn't work that way, but in fact it can. So now to the clinical part. There are a lot of situations in which we find expensive drugs, and this is one that got a ton of headlines. The first $1,000 pill. When a drug came out that could cure hepatitis C, which is generally a chronic infection, the drug manufacturer realized, hey, this isn't like if I created insulin or a treatment for asthma where the person's going to need it the rest of their life. I unfortunately have put myself out of a job. I've come up with a pill that once they take it, they don't need me anymore. And so if I'm going to recoup the benefits of creating this pill, I have to charge them an enormous amount of money for that upfront treatment. And this was one pill a day for 12 weeks. So 12 weeks times 7 days is 84 pills. And they priced it at $84,000. And so it comes out $1,000 a pill. And that sounded terrible when it came out. And maybe it is. You can have a value discussion about this. But at least they're taking a chronic disease and curing it. So if you were trying to get people, if you were going to say, where do I want to pay a lot for something? It would be in places where the health impact is large and where the cost of not being able to have that drug is also very large. So what happens with hepatitis C if you don't get it cured is you may go on to develop cirrhosis or liver cancer or need a liver transplant and experience a number of very high, much higher cost events than $84,000. Now, not everyone does, and I'm not saying that $84,000 is the right price. I'm just highlighting that there are situations where if we could get cures for things, that's a huge benefit to society, and that's the kind of thing that we want to incentivize. There are some other situations in our healthcare system, however, where drugs cost a lot, and most of the rest of them are not nearly as valuable, not nearly giving as much to the patient and to the system as those. So this is just a graph of the cost of per life gained of new cancer drugs over the last 20 years, starting back in 1996. And what you see is that I don't know how well you can see on the y-axis, but everything nowadays is over $100,000 per year of life gained, and we have had some over $500,000 per year of life gained. So we're looking at items where the benefit that they give you, the number of extra lives they're giving you, is small compared to the cost. But we have situations that are different even from that. So this is a drug, a new antibiotic, that had to have a black box warning added to it after it was introduced, because it actually turned out that its use was associated with higher mortality. And I'll just ask the group, what would you do in a normal market if your product was associated with high, I mean, how many Ford Pintos are sold lately, and how are they priced, right? But this was Pfizer, again, that name, and what they did was increase the price 20%. So the concern on their part, of course, was, well, now wait a minute, people might not use it as much, so if we're going to recoup our investment, we need to increase the price. And that actually happened. So the price went up. EpiPens have been in the news a lot because of dramatic increases in prices, and yet the EpiPen instrument, the drug is very old. Epinephrine's been around for a very long time. And the auto-injector that EpiPen has was actually developed and paid for primarily by the US government. So the Department of Defense was looking for battlefield protections, and you can imagine a number of situations in which you might use them. If someone dropped anthrax, you might want to have antibiotics immediately available to the soldiers and so forth. And so the Department of Defense paid almost all of the development cost of this. And as a result, it was a very inexpensive item until it was purchased by Mylan, who then at that point had essentially all of the market. There was no competition, and they just immediately overnight increased the price dramatically, and then went around saying, well, no one actually pays that price, so don't worry about it. They only did it in the United States, though. So doesn't matter what the numbers over there are. The giant bar is the United States price for an EpiPen, and this is the UK price for the EpiPen. Another situation. Sometimes generic drugs, or even non-drug things, did we get caught up, Josh, in the saline shortage? So saline is just a fancy name for salt water, and sometimes you give it to people who get dehydrated. For items that are purchased primarily by hospitals, it is not uncommon, if there's a shortage of those, for the wholesalers to just increase the price of these life-saving medicines by thousands of %. You remember when Hurricane Sandy came by, and also all three of the recent hurricanes, if people increased the price of a gallon of milk, 100% or 50%, the media was all over them for gouging. But these are thousands and thousands of % markups, happen every year whenever there's a shortage. And that just gets passed through to the hospitals, which get passed it through to the insurers, which pass it through to you. And the last situation we'll talk about is that sometimes drug prices are high and stay high because even though they're at the end of their patent and they could be generic, the original manufacturer pays the generic manufacturers to stay out of the market. And this is a not uncommon phenomenon. Obviously here there's no clinical value to this behavior. But our set of policies is such that it's worth it to do it to the drug companies. So this is the CEO of Teva saying that the Wall Street's enthusiasm, the CEO of Cephalon saying that Wall Street's enthusiasm for their stock was because they were able to effectively game this system and get a small penalty, but still get pay a small penalty to get $4 billion in sales protected. And they paid $125 million for the right, basically, to have $4 billion in protected sales. And if all your calculation is based on financial issues, then that's easy. 32 times. But again, in all of these conversations, a universal refrain is don't worry about the list prices because nobody pays that. That's just muddy water, and you're just looking at the wrong things. So we ended up analyzing claims from a bunch of different insurers for a population of about 50 million people, and it's true, there are a lot of discounts. So these are the 15 most widely used, or the 15 drugs for which commercial insurance plans paid the most that over the period of 2010 to 2014 that didn't have a major change in their market structure, like a major competitor went from brand to generic. We analyzed all those claims, what the percent discount was, and almost all of them had significant discounts, the average here about 25%. So yes, it's true. Nobody pays the list price. That is true. But in fact, as list price changes, list price here is the blue line, what people actually pay, and this is both what consumers pay out of pocket and what the total payment of the consumer plus the employer is, goes up not perfectly. So rebates, the difference here is rebates and discounts. They vary some year to year. So some years they're matched pretty closely, and other years they're a little bit off. But clearly the general trend over time is that those list price changes make a big difference to consumers and make a big difference to the employers or government programs that are behind them. I'll just conclude by saying there are a lot of different ways that drug prices have ended up being high, but only one that's really good. So if you come up with something that's a new major advance, that's actually something that we want to reward, and we want to reward heavily. But it's much easier to find in the current market situations where you're not that excited about the amount of money that's going out because either it wasn't a major, the new drug isn't a major advance, like some of the cancer drugs, or there's nothing redeeming in the situation, like when companies are paying to delay the introduction of generics. And it's really important to remember that although you'll hear it over and over again that the list price doesn't matter, the list price actually matters a lot. I'll stop there and see if people want to have any questions about that or have more they want to talk about. Yes. And let me bring you the microphone so we get it all recorded.
The point you made was the employer gets a rebate, but the price goes up for everybody due to higher premiums.
Right. So if the rebate gets back to the employer, that's not as bad for everyone. So because then it lowers the cost to the employer of having insurance. But most of the time, all or part of the rebate gets stuck at the insurer level and never reaches back to the employer. Yes.
So I'm curious about what are the policy implications? What are the possibilities for the consumer to try to navigate this, or insurance companies to navigate this? It seems very overwhelming.
Well, so that's why Lisa is both coming here today to talk about what consumers can do in the current state of the world. And then we're going tomorrow to Sacramento to talk about what policymakers can do to change the state of the world. And we will do that on national level as well. Lisa, you want to add?
Yeah, I was just going to say, kind of in general, transparency has been sort of our key word in our office. And that when a state or an organization or an employer knows how much something costs and how much rebate dollars they may or may not be getting, who else is getting paid along the way, once they have at least, I mean, for now, I feel like it's a spectrum of potential, and we're in the very beginning. The first is uncovering the knowledge and uncovering the information. And I would say employers often don't really have a good grasp as to how much money they're spending and potentially how much money they're wasting, how much money is being left on the table, how they may not be getting the very best deals possible. The list price issues, I mean, I feel like there's a tremendous amount of information that is not made clear. So that's, to me, this transparency is probably the first baby step in like 10 more steps.
And I'll, just to stay on the policy issue, I'll highlight, we use a patent as a very blunt instrument. We give the exact same patent to everyone for anything that they do. So I'm a lung doc, and a couple of decades ago, we began to worry about the impact of chlorofluorocarbons on the atmosphere. And we began to try and remove chlorofluorocarbons from refrigerators and other places. And then we realized, wow, they're in asthma puffers. And so it was decided, and this was actually a global agreement to try and get rid of CFCs because they were hurting the ozone layer, that we need to get them out of inhalers. So you might think that if somebody was making a product that was damaging the environment, that there would be no economic benefit given to them by government for no longer doing that thing that's bad for the environment. But in fact, what happened is all the makers of the respiratory medicines got brand new patents because they changed. It wasn't the drug in the inhaler, it was the propellant that pushed the drug out at you that had the CFC in it. So they had to change the delivery mechanism, and so they got brand new patents for doing that. And that's a policy decision that we make as a country that we can revisit. We can say, what do we want patents? It's not in the Constitution. The Constitution says we can give patents. It doesn't say they have to be X number of years. It doesn't say that they have to be the same for every single kind of product. So you could imagine, for instance, different patent lengths when you come up with a cure than when you come up with the next statin or the next purple pill, and so forth. Yes. We'll get first Catherine, then Josh.
Well, on that same point, so you said transparency is really important. How good are the data that we have, and where do we really need more data, and who should be giving us that data? Is it claims? Is it government?
Oh, I mean, you could even start at employer claims. Do you know that a lot of times employers try to get their claim data and they can't because they have been told by the pharmacy benefit manager that that's not their data. And so employers are forced to sue the PBMs in order to actually get that information. So it's everything, it starts there. I would say—
And this is not small, helpless employers.
Yeah, these are major
so
employers.
The California Public Employee Retirement System has been trying to get its hands, and the state of California is the largest employer here in California, in all states pretty much. The state is the largest employer, and so we're the biggest state. So we're talking about somebody who pays out hundreds of billions of dollars, and they can't get their claims. Yeah. So the biggest customer that's not the federal government can't get its claims. Josh? And then we'll come back to you.
Are there, first of all, thank you, great session. Are there any similarities to the craziness of the drug pricing or cost market outside of healthcare? I'm thinking about gasoline or airline tickets, where there might be some kind of implication for a path forward that's more understandable.
No, but I've likened it to mattress shopping. So if you've ever mattress shopped, manufacturers make different models for different stores, and they call them by different names, and they hide what's inside of them in a wrapper, and it's actually, traditionally, shopping for a mattress has changed, as you can imagine with Casper mattresses and things, but for a long time there was really no transparency. There was no clear way to compare a product against each other. And I don't know, mattresses are not, what happened is that you wind up with foam mattresses, and it's all about marketing from there, and that kind of circumvents this problem. I don't have a good, we've sat around and tried to talk about, well, what is there a model, is there a way forward, and I don't have one.
But there are markets that work much better, and almost all of them, what happens is that the people making purchasing decisions can get more information about what exactly it is that they're purchasing. Another weird thing about healthcare is that oftentimes the person making the purchasing decision isn't the ultimate payer and isn't as invested in making sure that the next dollar out goes to something really important as in other markets. So,
you know, one of the things that we've asked for in thinking about, you know, where do we start, what about the data? Do you know that when you get an insurance claim for your regular insurance, you get an explanation of benefits, and it clearly shows who paid what and how much. We've been asking for that for drugs forever, and even just simply like to show, like, I filled my prescription for sumatriptan and who paid what, but they won't do it. So this to us is an indicator that there's obviously funny business on the back end.
so okay.
It's a lie. So if you look at the requirement in Medicare Part D, you're required every month to get this statement. But all it says is your insurance paid this and you paid this. So it's not transparency whatsoever.
We don't even get that in the commercial market.
And just to be clear, it's not transparency because it goes transaction by transaction. It says you went to the pharmacy, you paid this, your insurance paid this, and it leaves unseen all of the stuff that was on that slide about the rebates and everything. So it looks like your insurer pays that, but a lot of money in the system gets diverted other places, and some of it even comes back to your insurer.
And that's been the reason that we've been told, well, you can never do an EOB because it doesn't really reflect reality. And we're like, well, why don't you do one that does?
And I think that that's the problem with even the latest transparency law in California is that it's transparency of what? Yeah. And if you aren't going to reveal all the pockets where the money is going and you make it so confusing that it's impossible for the consumer to understand it, much like your wrapped up mattress, then the transparency isn't going to mean anything. And those people skimming are going to continue to skim because big business, it wins in the United States.
I mean, one of the policy changes that we've talked about is should rebates continue to be legal? Exactly. I mean, there's a novel idea. Yeah.
You're so passionate about that when you said you looked at me for some reason when you said you can't see all the pockets, and I had this urge to empty my pockets and I got nothing. You were going to ask something? Oh, okay.
Oh. I have a question. I'm in Medicare Part D because Bechtel is no longer providing retiree insurance. So I was assuming that from 1 year to the next that my prescription drug plan would sort of, prices would get a little bit better because it's my understanding that under the Affordable Care Act, they're closing that donut hole. So if they're closing that donut hole, the cost to the insurance company and whatever should be less, so the plan should be going down. To my utter surprise, on the second renewal year, the plan went up.
You want to say something about that?
I would love you to come see me and I'll help you. And we do this, we go throughout San Francisco and do this all throughout open enrollment. So heading there tomorrow to a place here in San Francisco. But the reason is your Medicare Part D plan changes every single year. They are allowed to change the entire benefit. They're allowed to change the premium. They're allowed to change the copays. They're allowed to change the formulary so that, normally when you worked for Bechtel, you just kept the same insurance year in, year out, right? And it didn't matter who in your family was insured. But this entire benefit is based on the drugs that you take and nothing else. And with 25 plans available in the Part D market in California this year, that means 25 different, completely different benefits. So your benefit is allowed to raise its premium, it's allowed to raise your copays, and it's allowed to change your benefit, change the drugs that are on the formulary. So without you knowing it, even though we've had these huge policy changes and the closing of the gap, you could be paying thousands more for the exact same benefit year to year. Because, and they tell you that they send you something and it's buried on page 12 of 24 in your evidence of benefits and that they send you in November. But it's very complicated, and it is because that benefit is allowed to change every year and they're allowed to switch it.
And not all insurance markets are like that. So hearing here in California, so this is Obamacare open enrollment, don't forget. Here in California, if you're buying that part of it, the medical insurance part of it, there are rules about what a silver plan means and what a gold plan means. And so the product from one company to the next is pretty darn similar. And so you can set up policies where the kind of confusion and the unexpected expenses that you're reporting don't happen. But we just haven't done that for drug prices. You wanted to say something more, Heidi Marie? Oh, okay. Okay.
You know, one of the things I'm wondering is, okay, I'm from a commercial property insurance background, so I find this other stuff kind of semi-fascinating and horrifying. However, you know, in the commercial property market, you have different insurance companies, you have standard kinds of coverage, but it's like this supplemental insurance. What is it? There's like, for Medicare, there's like 7 plans. Yeah, right. Okay, but there's standard coverages, and then your choice as a consumer is to pick which insurer you want of which of these 7 or 8 plans that are available. But it's standardized. So why is not something like that happening in the drug end of it, so that I'd like a little more consistency about what it is I'm getting, and some better reassurance that what I think I'm getting is I'm getting, and it's going to be there next year. And I understand it's going to change every year, but as a consumer, what a crapshoot.
Yeah, it's a
Right.
shell
So that's a second example. What we've done here in California with our exchange is an example of creating a set of rules that make the product more uniform. And you're right. The supplemental program in Medicare didn't start off with just 10 items. It started off with more chaos, and then we decided that's too complicated. And so as a nation, we said, you're only going to have these 10 choices, and you can through among those 10 choices, if you pick choice number 3, then people are competing to sell you choice number 3. So it is a decision we've made as a society to be more careful about what the product is in Medicare supplemental insurance than in drug insurance. And we didn't have to decide that.
But Amazon supposedly is going to fix it.
So the comment there is Amazon's going to fix this, and we've actually seen a number of other things. So CVS is proposing to buy Aetna. So now your neighborhood pharmacy may own a national insurer, and that's actually because, as it turns out, CVS is 3 times as big as Aetna, the big national insurer, because there's so much money in their pharmacy benefit manufacturer function that they've grown to be much larger than Aetna is. And you want to say something on another topic?
It's loosely related in that although we're a free market society, we have created silos, and the pharmacy bucket, the durable medical equipment bucket, the medical healthcare bucket, they don't speak to each other, and they don't look at each other, and there's so much overlap. And if we were able to have some kind of transparency, God forbid I say socialized medicine, but if we had some kind of way that we had a more transparent way to look at the global, you would see we could prevent emergency department visits because the patient was able to have their basic medications, and the costs we're spending here could only be solved if we took care of there. I feel like other countries have had that workflow, and there must be a way that we can be less free market, more.
Well, can I separate 2 concepts that you put together there? So transparency and socialized medicine are completely unrelated to each other. You can have transparency and socialized medicine, but you can have transparency without socialized medicine. And right now, we've chosen not to have transparency. In addition, we're free market in our philosophy in general in this country, but there's very little that resembles a traditional concept of a free market in healthcare. And the Founding Fathers wanted many of the non-free market aspects that we have. So patents are in the Constitution. The Founding Fathers did think there should be government intervention in markets to make people want to innovate. So from our very founding, we were not completely free market. Well, I guess that's 1787. So 13 years into our existence, we were not completely free market. The question is, have we gotten that bit right? So if there's agreement that we want good parts of free market and good parts of government intervention, have we found that? Have we found that balance where we've got the right amount of free market and the right amount of government intervention, and the government interventions achieve the things that we're trying to achieve?
I'd say we have basically corporate. I mean, it's not socialized medicine, it's corporate medicine. And that corporate, that structure, whether or not it was intended by the founding fathers or not, regardless, is not a free market. That is at no point is it free or transparent. In my opinion, it doesn't meet any of the qualifications of a free market, and that is at the heart of the issue. And until that ever shifts, whether it's transparency laws or we can order from Canada or whatever, we will face the same issue, and we're just basically, it literally is a shell game, and that is we are just trying to figure out where it is.
You had mentioned with patents earlier about, we treat them all the same. So is that a feasible thing to change where patents for new drugs are different? And how is that a discussion currently at the table?
Remember in Schoolhouse Rock where I'm just a bill on Capitol Hill? It's just a law. So the manifestation of patents right now took the constitutional notion the government can give a patent and turned it into a fixed length patent that's the same for everything. That's what the law says. You can change that law with 51% vote and a presidential signature. So yeah, it can definitely be changed. How to do that is likely complicated, and it's unlikely that if you change it, you get it right the first time.
I think it's the place you begin. It's like transparency. It's part of the puzzle, but not until we all put more pressure on our leaders, our government leaders, the corporations that we agree can exist the corporations exist because we agree that they are an entity, that we hold them responsible, that we ask for sustainability. I mean, there's to me like a laundry list of things. Adjusting patents is one of the key, probably 12 different steps.
Yeah, there are a lot of things. So if we do want the most you can get out of a free market and the most you can get out of government intervention, then you have to ask, what would a free market actually look like, and are we there? And the original concept of free market relies on, you've got lots of competition. In fact, the original concept is you have infinite competitors, and also who respond to what consumers want and are willing to pay for, and also that the consumers have perfect information. They can know exactly who's selling what and how good is that thing they're selling. And so if you have an absence of transparency, you can't possibly have a functioning free market. All the economists agree on that, and isn't something we have to argue about. So if we're arguing about it, it's not an argument about free market or not. It's an argument about, do I get to keep the benefits I've scraped out of the rest of society, and maintain the extra money that I'm getting out of it not being a free market system, or do you, the rest of society, get to have the benefits of transparency?
And I should mention one other thing that I always just get tripped up on. There is an ethical argument to be made that a patent that the public owns roughly, they've paid for 38% of the basic science for most drug products that hit the market. So you already we have collective ownership of those, I would argue, already, which means we have, to me is the ethical sort of piece to that, the ability to say we want reform patent law and allow that to happen.
I was curious, a few years ago, I think it was NPR, started allowing consumers to report what they were paying for medical imaging and medical procedures, and it actually forced competition in the Bay. I was at another institution at that time, and they addressed some of why their procedures may cost more and had to reduce the price. Is there something like this now, an independent organization that's allowing consumers or pharmacies or providers to somehow report the cost of these drugs and force some transparency at a grassroots sort of level?
So Consumer Reports has looked at doing that, and we wanted to start with subscribers first, just to let us know, hey, how much did you pay for any of these medications, and just start that conversation so that it's almost like so there's a mechanism for people to feel comfortable to say, oh, I paid $100 or I paid $10. But I haven't found anything. There is Elizabeth Rosenthal from Kaiser Health News, formerly the New York Times, has her own sort of entity of, you can come and talk about how much money you're spending and how much, but it's not organized in a super, like, almost like a survey kind of way. So I would love to get a survey.
And UCSF and Consumer Reports have a website, cahealthcarecompare.org, at which you can compare the prices of other things. And if you want, you can actually go from that. So what you get there is, let's say you're thinking about having hip surgery. You get some information about the quality of hip surgery at various hospitals, things like how often do they have infections and complications and stuff like that. And then also, because it varies so much around California, you get an estimate of the range of prices in your area. Then you can go from there, you can click to your insurer and get for you at a particular hospital. That you have to sign in with your insurer. And you can get for you at a particular hospital. So maybe you use that website to find the 3 places you're thinking about having a new hip or having a baby or whatever it is that you're thinking about. But you can't do that for drugs. This is part of the lack of transparency, is we can acquire claims for all those other things and figure that out, and thus far haven't been able to do that for drugs.
Curious as to your thoughts about companies that exist currently, not so much about transparency around drug prices, but just how much a hip surgery costs or how much an MRI costs, like Castlate, not being terribly successful thus far, and the research showing that when consumers do access that transparent data, it doesn't actually influence or change their behavior that much in terms of where they actually go. They actually just end up going wherever their physician refers them to, or et cetera, or whoever's in network. And I'm wondering, as we advocate for higher transparency in drug prices, what else needs to happen to ensure that this actually works the way that we would envision it to work?
Thoughts, Lisa?
Well,
So, I mean, this is the longest standing transparency about how markets are working. Forever, basically. When Lisa's parents were able to look in Consumer Reports and see the price, and see the features, and see how well they did the things they were supposed to do. So this is the organization to turn to.
I was thinking about how, while in our early discussion, healthcare didn't used to be a consumer market in the way that it's become now. We are entering the era of like consumerism, in shopping for cars, like shopping, and thinking about like, are there other corollary markets? There really haven't been, and I feel like we're in this awkward phase. And there are some interesting arguments that we should not have to shop. You should not have to try to compare hip surgery prices or Lipitor prices, and that maybe through a single payer system you would not have to do that. So there's that argument, and I fall sort of to the reality is, for affordability's sake, you usually do. I think I can't comment on the Castlate part, but I can say that if somebody's not incentivized because of changes in what they would pay out of pocket, they may not see the value in shopping for something. You know what I mean? Like most people that we've come across shop for drugs prices because they can't afford whatever that out-of-pocket cost is, so they have a direct incentivization.
And you could view the movement of the healthcare market from one where you sought the help of a professional and they guided you through, to you have a big deductible and you have to go figure it out, as a failure on the part of clinicians, clinical organizations, and insurance companies. Basically what happened is, over decades, those groups didn't manage to work out how to get the waste out of the system and how to get people the care they needed at a reasonable cost. And the cost in total grows so high that the government and employer payers who were paying for it before said, we can't keep doing this. And so people looked around and said, well, who can we give responsibility to? And it was shifted not to the professionals, but rather to the people who haven't been to medical school, who haven't been to pharmacy school, who haven't the people who have the least information are the ones who now have to put their dollars at risk and try to figure things out. And that's the kind of thing that's actually, again, it's a social choice. We got ourselves here by protecting the organizations that are now absolving themselves of responsibility and allowing them to continue to do very well while consumers were hurting. And that's not something we have to continue. We could say, actually, let's put the professionals in charge and make them accountable. Yes.
So I have problems here for all of these reasons that we've just been talking about when we start looking at transparency, especially for drugs. Looking at who are the people that take the most drugs. There are most vulnerable populations. There are elderly, are disabled, maybe the least able to shop and compare, and maybe the least health literate in order to do that. And it just strikes me that some of the things that we took out of the Affordable Care Act, like the public option, even for drugs, could drive the sort of bring back that what you're talking about, the free market with the sort of government intervention, and look at that and say, do we have protection for the most vulnerable? And do we have a public option? And then that public option, because it is intended for our vulnerable populations and anyone else who wants that, now we have insurers that have to compete with that. So their competition isn't each other. They're competing with this public option that is lower cost, meant for all, and then the rest have to compete with it. So you have that public-private market. And you look at it, and I just keep thinking about all of this and the transparency. I can't get my head around it. When I deal with Medicare patients, and I look at these, this shop and compare tool, which for me is fabulous on the Medicare website, for the majority of my faculty can't even navigate it, and they're very health literate. And we're asking our seniors to do this, giving them 25 options, giving them that. So transparency is a piece, I think, but it's a piece that only applies to those that can use it.
Transparency, often when I use the word transparency, I also mean transparency to the payer. So not just to the consumers trying to make a choice between CVS and Costco, but also to a Consumer Reports entity as it's trying to buy medications on behalf of its employees. That transparency in the full payer market is completely missing. And that's part of it.
And I think the people who are skeptical about your suggestion of a public option would say there is a public option for veterans. It's the VA, and look at the problems that it's having. So it may not be immediately obvious to some.
And so I wanted to raise up a point, to your point about efficiencies and kind of shifting the responsibilities to the experts, the content experts. So for example, pharmacists, and just enabling just a countrywide mandate, and not just variabilities in state for things like medication therapy management services and medication reviews, and not just to our high-risk populations, but just open for all patients. And I think incentivizing and mandating that then frees up the pharmacists in the ambulatory care settings, in the community pharmacy settings, to have the time to offer that service. And I think that's key and will contribute to the efficiencies and hopefully minimize the high costs to consumers.
Consumer Reports declared a National Check Your Meds Day in October, and that it was an effort to remind the public that your local pharmacist is one of your most accessible healthcare providers, and who can look at all your list of drugs and at least identify, even in 5 minutes, more than what many people we learned had. And so that was I completely agree. Well, so you're saying there's nobody pays them. Our hope is that there are some insurance companies do pay for a longer medication review, not just a 5-minute consultation. I think that change comes about different ways, and sometimes can come through enough consumers coming through the door and expecting that, perhaps medication therapy management.
One of the highest costs of our current rancorous public debate is that it's much harder to actually try new things. And I think it's genuinely unclear in many instances which interventions would make things better. But it's really hard to get anything tried because we argue only about ideology and we don't argue very nicely about ideology, and so it's difficult even when one party does manage to get in power for them to actually implement anything.
Could you opine for just a minute about many of the complexities that have been talked about are in the open system of healthcare, but we have a few closed systems, Kaiser being one and the VA being another, where some of the players are not present. Does that quote market work better? Do we know?
I've seen Kaiser on a stage, as the CEO of Kaiser on a stage before, having the similar complaints as Express, Express Scripts or CVS Caremark, and having the same trouble negotiating with drug manufacturers and negotiating with Express Scripts or other pharmacy benefit managers. I think they may demonstrate lower costs, but they definitely have been articulate publicly about having the same trouble.
We have 2 more comments? Okay, 2 more comments.
As a patient of Kaiser, I can tell you there is no transparency between the patient and the hospital. I had to make 20 phone calls to find out the cost of one treatment, and eventually I came back to the person I started with, and she said, I apologize, I can't find out the price myself. It's only when you take out a credit card and they swipe it, you find out what the cost of any particular treatment or a medicine is. That's nonsense.
And that's actually a really common finding in secret shopper studies. If you want any particular medical service and you call up to a doctor or a hospital and try to ask ahead of time, how much will it cost me if I need a mammogram? How much will it cost me? Or I need a mastectomy. How much will it cost me? And it's a universal finding that you can't get a straight answer. Generally, people won't give you any answer at all, and when they do, it's usually wrong. Hi.
As one of the diabetes people working to try to improve access to care at UCSF, what we find is people who get their medication, but they get 90-day supplies instead of 30-day supplies. Insulin doesn't last that long unless it's well stored. And so they get a 3-month supply, but it ends up being wasted. Then they have all this effort to try to get reduced drug prices, actually, and by leveraging a 90-day supply actually hurts them in the end because they're just not able to keep that kind of volume in their home and stored well. So as we talk about cheap prices and making sure we get the best deal and going to mail order pharmacies, et cetera, it might not always be the best. And in the overall pricing for the patient and for the cost for us, because sometimes drugs change before the 90-day market.
We've said
and that's
that.
a situation where transparency would help so much. So if you had a bunch of people who were getting 90-day prescriptions and then having to go out and get extra 30-day prescriptions, if let's say CalPERS, if CalPERS could see that, then maybe they could do something, and they would have the incentive to do something about it. The PBM does not have the incentive to do, because as we showed, every time something goes through, they take a little bit. And the more things that go through, the better. You basically can't identify problems like, you could, because you're the diabetes expert trying to help them and they're explaining this problem to you. But the people with the purse string that could actually do something about it can't see it very well. And okay, we'll keep going. Sorry, I don't want to keep you late.
So Josh, can I just answer one quick question of yours? And I think you said VAs or Kaisers, and I think VA is a complete exception. It's the only system that has price controls in place. So it's the national example. So that whole issue of what a veteran pays for drugs is a very different answer than what Kaiser and Kaiser's CEOs are saying. Believe me, the VA doesn't have all the answers, I get that. But I think from a drug pricing standpoint, they're the lucky guys. They're the ones that actually have the lowest possible price, and their patients have the greatest advantage because there is, their drugs are this, or this, and there is no cash price. for a veteran if it's a formulary drug, and they've got a pretty liberal non-formulary process. But it starts at the very beginning, which is the way the drugs are purchased through the VA system, which is completely different than any other system, which also has its own rebates and things like we found last year in our session.
And so that just highlights, so a lot of people said things about single payer and public option, et cetera. You can have, VA is a public option for veterans. You can have a public option, and if you don't run it well, it doesn't do well, and if you do run it well, it does well. So the VA is getting good drug prices and having real problems with access right now. And historically, they've had, what the problem is has varied over time. But it's much more about what you do within a system than where the money is. And if you have any kind of system, so part of the big problems in the VA with the access is there was fake transparency. So in any system that you're not transparent, it's highly likely that you get bad behavior that you can't identify and bad outcomes that you don't know could be improved. Anything else? Yes. We'll do last one. You get the last word.
Nobody's mentioned the fact that our elected officials can be bought and paid for because it's legal to pressure them with hundreds of thousands of dollars to make laws that benefit them. And so no matter what you do at the ground level, as long as our politicians are making laws that allow the pharmaceutical industry to profit, it's going to end up being against the law.
You know, we couldn't have ended on a more sobering but totally true note. And one of the things that we talked about a lot in our coverage is that when you think about EpiPens, everything about that was legal. Nobody, as far as we can tell, nobody broke the law. Daraprim, in Turing Pharmaceuticals, as soon as Martin Shkreli, takes the drug, closes off the system, and then raises the price, totally legal. What we're experiencing is we just have to decide that we want it to be illegal. And I think it's up to us to put pressure on the places where change can happen, and lawmakers are one of them. And I do think that transparency and public acknowledgement and really holding accountable our lawmakers is key. It really is. And it turns out that most of America thinks the same. And that 90% of Americans believe that the government is the mechanism to fix this problem.
Well, Lisa, thank you so much for coming. I can't wait to hear what you have to say in Sacramento tomorrow. That should be really interesting because we'll be talking to the people who, at least for this state, have control and could do something about it, and we'll see how that conversation goes.